The retail sector is exciting, innovative, and fast-paced. The last thing you want to do is slow down to find expert legal advice. And that's where Freeths, a top 50 commercial law firm, comes in. Freeths' retail team currently advises around 400 retailers and brands in the UK and internationally. Our focus is to keep the complex simple for you, get the problem solved and the deal done. And we do this by applying the skills and experience of our dedicated team of lawyers to get to the heart of any legal matter quicker. We understand the demands that retailers face, but can also identify windows of opportunity. Thanks to a comprehensive service offering that's big on strategic expertise and focus, this offers the marketplace advantage our specialist subsector teams provide. Far from being one-size-fits-all, our free-thinking approach delivers tailor-made legal guidance that helps you thrive, giving you the legal support and day-to-day peace of mind you need to provide world-class customer service, reducing your risk and safeguarding your business right down the line. Freeths Retail. Your line is our focus.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. You have some of the retail team here, and we're going to be looking at some of the trends that we can see as lawyers that are coming down the track in the next year. We'll be delighted to hear from you, and please do use the chat function at the bottom to ask any questions or the Q&A session which you would like to put towards us. We're very happy to answer any of those questions as we go through or at the end. And we'd be delighted to hear from you to see whether some of our points actually resonate with what you're finding too in your daily lives and what you're believing is going to happen in the next year. So just to kick off, what we thought we would do to start off with is introduce the team and then to look at some of the trends that each of us are seeing from our particular areas. So Matt, can I come to you first to introduce yourself, and then perhaps Dave and Simon, and then I'll come back to you to ask about some of the trends in the property space.
Philippa, hi everyone, Matt Stevens, and I'm a partner in the real estate team here at Freeths.
Thank you very much. Dave.
David Lane, I'm a partner in the Freeths commercial team.
And Simon.
Thanks, Philippa. Morning, everybody. I'm Simon Barker, and I head up the IP and media team at Freeths.
Thank you very much. So, Matt, we're looking at trends today, and of course, the property world has been been an interesting journey over the last few years, particularly with the online side coming through very strongly. So, what are you seeing, and what do you think the trends are going to be for the people on this webinar today that are interested in the property world?
I think for me, the main thing is a transition, or continue the transition towards retail needing to be part of a sort of destination space, and that sort of combination between retail itself, the leisure, the hospitality. We've seen over the last 2 years the increase in the convenience that is afforded by online shopping only, and really that's almost overtaken the convenience of physical shopping in a lot of ways now. So I think retail, in terms of its physical space, needs to find a way to draw people back into it, and that's partly through being part of an enticing destination, and then partly through the offering of an experience rather than just a pure function. So the interaction with the store, the interaction with the space, and it's really, I think, going to be a continuation of that, and will be, I think, where the real property element of retail goes, and those that do that well are going to be successful in it.
So we've seen over the Christmas period the numbers actually fall for online as opposed to last year, and a bit of resurgence in the people coming into shopping centres and into physical retail, despite all the COVID issues around Christmas, which were difficult. So are you seeing that the stores are repurposing in terms of the online side of things? Are you seeing more opportunity to click and collect? And do you think that's going to continue? Yeah,
I think so. I mean, I think the one thing to say about that is people that have missed it. You know, there's people that missed the interaction, people that missed getting out and around and doing the things that they enjoyed doing. And I think part of that is a bounce back from 2 years of not being able to do that. So there's been a definite bounce. Then, as you say, you bring in the omnichannel piece where you can do click and collect. You can combine the convenience of an online purchase with a with a trip to a destination again to collect. You can see what else there is, as well as picking the thing that you've already shopped around for. You've got your best deal. So I think that's a good example of omnichannel working in a positive way, which sort of benefits the consumer, and I think that will continue.
And what about the sort of the pressure on property rents and spaces in the various different centres at the moment? Are you seeing a more appetite for actually taking physical retail now? And are there any particular trends in the length of leases and those sorts of things, or is it still a very difficult picture out there?
It's mixed, right? I think good spaces being taken. There's the modelling, the sort of the technical or the financial modelling is changing. There's obviously been a continuation of movement towards turnover rents or the more flexible arrangements, whether that's whole or partly turnover. But the good operators need space. Good operators acknowledge that they require space as well as a online presence, or certainly in large parts of retail they do. Some businesses struggle, so there has been more space available, which has had an impact on value and an impact on rents. But I think we've not seen the sort of mass destruction and the mass loss of it as an asset class that was perhaps a concern at the start of the pandemic. I think it's holding up pretty well, and people are more creative. There's more options available in terms of renting models and so on. So I think it's still working. It's holding up. Okay,
thank you. Dave, on the commercial side, I know you were involved in one of the frictionless stores recently. Is that the sort of trend on the commercial side? What's happening in the commercial world for retailers at the moment, and what's going to dominate the next year or so, do you think?
Well, I think, just echoing what Matt said, there's clearly been a seismic shift, and everyone is still trying to understand what the new normal is from a consumer perspective. And a key way in which people are looking to grapple with that is by investing in tech. And that's both in terms of sort of consolidating the needs must tech developments that people put in place to deal with the challenges of the pandemic, as well as looking forward to try and predict sort of what's going to give them the edge over the next 12 months. And the issue is there are so many things from a tech perspective that you can invest in at present. So frictionless stores is a great example of that. But you've also got, just following on from what Matt said, there's huge options in terms of in-store, the experiential tech and the augmented reality tech. There's NFTs and the blockchain, automation, drones, last mile delivery services. There's so much that you could, from a tech perspective, look at, that it's, in terms of determining what the next 12 months is going to be, that's almost the real challenge. It sort of reminds me of the old adage that 50% of what I spend on advertising is wasted, and the trouble is identifying which half. I think that's going to be true for a lot of businesses, tech spending over the next 12 months, as everyone just tries to understand what tech really delivers true value in whatever the new normal turns out to be.
And I guess also what consumers are reacting to, because at the end of the day, retail is very consumer driven. It's what our customers want that is most important. The customer is definitely king, isn't it? We need to be saving cost, etc., and doing the right things, but we need to be making sure tech is working effectively for what people actually want.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's going to be one of the real challenges here, is that because of the breadth of what people want to do, there's no point sort of going for what we think consumers want. We need to identify what people are actually reacting to in practice, and getting that data and understanding those trends, and having the agility within your business to react to those trends is going to be absolutely core to the next 12, 24 months.
Great, thank you. Simon, if I can bring you in on the conversation now, in the IP world, advertising, brand is so important to retailers, and making sure you can really get an edge when you're trying to capture the customer's attention, as it were, to market your goods. So what are you seeing as the key trends coming through for this year?
Yeah, Philippa, I think you're absolutely right to say that it's got to be consumer driven. I think it's a competitive marketplace. There are increasing inflationary pressures on consumers. So brands and retailers are obviously looking for more and more ways to appeal to consumers. Maybe to some extent, to Dave's point, testing what works and what doesn't, but it's about creating new offerings and drawing those consumers in. So I think it's not surprising that we've seen more sort of co-branding and collaborations with brands joining force. So the likes of Polaroid and Lacoste, their collection, Lego and IKEA. You know, the idea being that the sum is greater than the parts, things that are attractive to consumers. I think we've seen sort of maybe a bit of a trend to shops in shops. I think only last week M&S announced a collaboration with Clinique to see their products come into M&S stores. I think Matt made the point about, omni-channel marketing. It's maturing with retailers and brands really looking to connect that digital space to the physical space seamlessly and to create more experiential shopping online and in the real world. Social media platforms have transformed. I think, the likes of Instagram have become online marketplaces and communications channels to engage and influence consumers, appeal to different values, different tastes. We've had on the tech side, to Dave's point, Currys introduced Shop Live, like personal shopping. There's so many different ways to reach consumers, it seems, these days. Augmented reality, I think Dave mentioned, we're seeing that. And the thing that everybody's talking about at the moment, it seems to me, is the sort of metaverse, with Nike having launched a virtual world in November, and Mark Zuckerberg announced his plans for the metaverse. So from an IP brand perspective, these create more opportunities for brand abuse and different challenges for brand management and protection. But they're opportunities for retailers and brands.
So let's just take that topic of the metaverse. In terms of legal challenges, people on the call today wanting to know from a legal perspective the sort of things that we need to be looking out for. Dave, if I can bring you in a bit on the conversation here, because clearly the tech side of it is really important too. What are the key sorts of things in the metaverse that we ought to be thinking about? And then perhaps, Simon, I can bring you in a little bit more on that too.
I mean, the metaverse is pioneer country at present, because it's being used as a buzzword that a lot of people recognise, but quite what it is still very much, I think, being defined, and a lot of people are exploring it in a lot of different ways. I think Simon's right. The core to that is branding, but from a tech perspective, it's sort of understanding and making sure that what you are doing with the metaverse is properly integrated with your offering and is something that you understand. I think this is key for a lot of the tech points at present, is that it's easy to get swept up in whatever the latest trend is, precisely because it's the latest trend, but without having that core understanding within your business to sort of to make that business case for why are you doing what you are doing. There's a real risk that you're just not going to see the value that you might there, because at a really macro level, the disputes around the metaverse are between the likes of Facebook, Google, and Apple and so on, as they try and control the hardware elements of the metaverse. And I think part of the next stage of the evolution of all of that is going to be who actually brings out the breakout bit of hardware, like the original iPhone, like the original iPod, for example, that really brings the metaverse into reality. And because we're not quite at that stage yet, that's where a lot of the money's being spent, because whoever controls that hardware element of it is going to have a huge advantage. Because I think Facebook said, or Meta said recently, that changes that Apple had introduced in terms of their iPhone were a headwind to Facebook's revenue, and they said that headwind amounted to about $10 billion. So control of the hardware is just so fundamental nowadays that from a macro level is going to be absolutely key. And then whatever happens with that is going to dictate from a micro level in terms of individual businesses what the opportunities are.
Okay, good point there. It's not as well, it's not an easy area, but actually joining all the dots with hardware, software, and then actually extracting the data from it and using that data as you need to do it, and getting that to talk to your systems is going to be a big challenge, I'm guessing.
Yeah, absolutely. Simon touched on it. The cross-platform integration from an omnichannel perspective is becoming increasingly important. You've got to, if you may have historically had separate elements of your business in terms of this arm dealt with e-commerce, this arm dealt with retail, etc. And as we become increasingly omnichannel, it's more and more important that all of those elements are as joined up as they can be, not only to get the best value that you can, but also to make sure that you're properly meeting your regulatory and compliance obligations in respect of principally data protection.
Simon, have you got any comments do you want to add on to that, sort of what people should be looking out for in terms of maybe legal aspects to getting more involved in the metaverse?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because I remember Second Life around 10 years ago, and people, which never really took off, and I suspect that it didn't because there wasn't the enabling technology. So I think Dave makes a really good point there, that, you know, and from a consumer perspective, it has to be accessible. You know, I can't see consumers kind of relishing walking around with Oculus headsets or whatever, but if wearable tech becomes more prevalent and more acceptable, then you can see that maybe there is a case for it taking off. As far as the legal aspects are concerned, well, when Second Life was discussed, I think it was about 10 years or so, people started to think about, well, registering their brands for and trademarks for different types of service, and that's happening again with the advent of the metaverse. You know, I think McDonald's were looking at it in the US only a couple of weeks or so. New services that align with that kind of new space. So I think that's something to watch for. But the corollary is that obviously, if you're creating another channel, it's another channel to monitor and police. So I think, you know, there are legal challenges, Philippa. But I think the whole, is it going to take off, is an interesting question.
Yeah, very interesting question for if you read a lot of the information that's out there, it's growing at a pace, but I guess the ultimate test is whether consumers like it, and how that actually all fits together, and that's a little bit of the unknown at the moment, isn't it? But certainly things are starting to be tested, which is interesting.
Yeah, I agree.
Moving to the sort of the frictionless stores, we've seen some of those now, and I know, Dave, you've been involved in one of them in particular. What are we seeing on that side? I know it's a bit early to tell how the projects are going, but those sorts of things have been happening in China and also in America for quite a while now. Do we see more frictionless stores happening in the UK? Is that the way you think that retailers will be going? And does it work just as much for, say, the fashion industry as it does for the sort of the grocery supermarket sector? Or is it more difficult to police things like that? I mean, I don't know, for example, how you recognise the actual items, Dave, and you'll be able to tell us a little bit more about that and how all that tech works. So what's your thoughts on the frictionless stores and how that's all going to impact?
I think the really interesting, I mean, the tech from a frictionless store perspective is fascinating in terms of typically it's done with having an array of cameras around the store which can track individual consumers and can track motions in terms of putting things within baskets and so on, and then that's associated with users' accounts and credit cards that they have registered on their accounts. So then when they leave the store, that's how the transactional element of it is captured, and from a purely tech perspective, that's an incredible achievement in terms of how that tech works. From a broader, what does it mean for the sector perspective, I think the most interesting point of it is that it's a further blurring of that line that I mentioned in terms of truly becoming omnichannel, because by necessity, if you have a frictionless store, you have to have a way to recognize the people that are coming into your store so that you can associate their purchases with the credit card and so on. And so a lot of frictionless stores are all predicated on the fact that you download an app or something similar before you enter the store, and then once you're in the store, you add to your basket and leave. But it's that element of it in the background that is really potentially very, very interesting here, because that means that you're bringing the online profile that you have about people that's previously been used for sort of targeting marketing, etc., in websites and giving suggestions about what people might want to purchase and so on online, and you're bringing that level of data to a physical presence in store. So the frictionless element of the purchases in store is the first part of the trip here. But the really exciting stuff, I think, comes from the fact that if it becomes normalized that people announce their entry into a store through the use of through an app and so on, then your possibilities for what you can deliver within the space, within the store, just become huge. I mean, again, from a very simple perspective, the marketing, etc., can become reactive. So you can have sort of end of line advertising that is tailored to people who are passing it at a particular point. But more interestingly from the experiential perspective, and picking up on fashion that you mentioned, you can have there are various apps being developed where that you can have your fit, your measurements and so on included within a profile within an app, so that you can scan clothes on the shelf and then see within the app what it would probably look like on you, without the need to go to without the need to go to a changing room, for example. So again, there's a huge number of possibilities there of having that connection between the store and the app and the profile all brought together into one truly omnichannel offering. The risk of that, the downside, is that it creates a gate at the entrance to your store, because you are saying you need to have this app before you can come into this store, which, depending on what your offering is, and depending on how loyal or otherwise people generally are within your sector, could form as a barrier to people wanting to enter into your store if they can see two other stores nearby that don't have that barrier that they might just walk into instead to get the same product. So I think that's the key hurdle to be overcome. But if it is, and using apps within the stores continues to be normalized, then huge number of possibilities.
And Matt, on your side of things in the properties, if you're going to go, say, frictionless, are the things that, if people are thinking about that they need to be planning ahead for in leases and things like that? Or is it something that can be dealt with just by the normal license for alterations and those sorts of things?
I think it's interesting from a purely legal point of view, as in the legal documentation. It's no big change to fit a store out with the cameras rather than the old-fashioned, tills and whatnot. But where it's interesting is, for me, is from a sort of property market point of view. And I think on the tech we have at the minute, the grocery sector does lend itself best to this. I think, once you bring in clothes in and fashion and those other things, then I think it doesn't work quite as well because of the try-on thing, which, although Dave talks about, augmented reality, that's more a work in progress than a fact of life at the minute. But for groceries, this works really well. One effect that has does away with a large space requirement for tills and post till shopping trolleys and that sort of thing. So it actually, that change in required space is almost so significant as to alter the market, and a grocery retailer can go into space that was previously too small for it now, and can effectively trade that space. And so that adds more. The grocery guys are very successful at the minute, so that adds more competition in the market for smaller space. It arguably takes some demand out of the bigger space market, depending on the models that they're looking to operate. So whilst the legal side of it is not that different, there's nothing really new in that from real property side of things. I think it will actually have an effect on the market for occupiers in general, and the extent to which it's rolled out, the extent to which it becomes common practice, will have a feed-in effect to the market in general for that sort of space.
Just before we move on from the topic, David, we've had a question around facial recognition and how that's, I'm guessing, how that's working, and whether you think that is actually going to transform some of the things that are happening in store. And obviously it's certainly transformed my life when I can just use facial recognition on my phone, which makes it a lot easier than remembering lots of passwords, etc. But it's clever stuff, isn't it, in terms of the ability to do that in these frictionless stores, particularly on certain in age and things like that, try to work out whether people are who they say they are on their app.
Absolutely, and it's just following up from what Matt says, that's an interesting example of an area that is actually sort of really challenged by the move to frictionless stores, which is if you are in an area that is regulated in some way, and the most obvious that comes to mind is around age verification, whether it's sale of alcohol or sale of other restricted products, then the licenses that you have for the sale of that alcohol, for example, may well be predicated on the fact that you run a Challenge 21, Challenge 25 policy of some form, which again assumes that there will be a stage during the journey that there is a cashier sitting there and saying, yes, I think this person is 21, 25 and can buy the products. So it's definitely a challenge bringing in the tech to be able to make sure that you still adequately meet those regulatory obligations. And what we found in practice is that because it is so bleeding edge at present, you really do have to engage with the relevant authorities and with the police and with the licensing authorities and so on, to have those conversations and say, this is what we are proposing to do. Can we vary the license accordingly to be able to do that? So I think a lot of people are at the stage where they are doing trials in this area at present, and so it's very much a developing piece in terms of what are the standards, what do the police expect, what do licensing authorities expect from this technology, and what are the challenges it presents. Because I mean, the raw statistics from the studies that we get that have been done are that a lot of the age recognition software is now more accurate than your average cashier is in terms of assessing age. But it's transitioning whether or not those figures are accepted really by the relevant licensing authorities and so on, and then from a legal perspective, ensuring that you're clear how that is captured and the responsibility for that is captured with whoever is providing you with the relevant software, because ultimately at the end of the day the regulatory and compliance obligation is going to fall on the retailer. And if one day in the background the software falls over and none of the age verification checks are done properly because of a software glitch, then you could be facing a real challenge there. So that definitely is a key area of risk to be considered if in any move to frictionless stores.
And I'm guessing that if Mission Impossible, Tom Cruise and the guys come through with all their nice 3D printed masks, so you can mimic each other, then that's even going to be an even bigger challenge. But maybe that one's not going to happen for a little while anyway.
Yeah, it hasn't come up. I've had balaclavas come up, but not I haven't had the Mission Impossible question yet.
That's good. Simon, I was going to ask you about the social media side of brand and marketing, and we've seen, and again, I know you've been involved in the Colin and Cuthbert conversations that have been going on through social media. Is that a trend, do you think, now that people will be going to be using sort of stretching social media in a slightly different way to make engaging stories that might encourage people to recognize their brands more? How do you think that's all going to play out?
Yeah, I think it's a great example of a retailer harnessing social media to engage with its customers, generate that positive PR out of a difficult situation. It's the sort of thing that we're kind of, as lawyers, becoming more and more adept at in supporting clients, particularly in handling disputes. I think, to answer your question, there will be lots of people looking in on that and thinking that was really great and probably wanting a piece of that, because it's part of that digital to physical connection, isn't it? At the end of the day, it's generating engagement with consumers and connecting all the dots, generating a bit of a story. So yeah, I think definitely people will have seen that and thought that was great, and let's do more of that. I think it is an extension of engagement with consumers online through particularly social media platforms.
Yeah, it's certainly different, isn't it? Because in the past, brands would probably want to suppress any potential arguments between them, or maybe just be notifying the Advertising Standards Association and trying to have a dig at somebody else, but wouldn't want to do it in a public space. So this is something which was quite new, and so interesting. You think it's likely to potentially continue.
It's yeah, it is. It's an interesting take, isn't it? But it's about understanding what appeals to your particular the particular consumer that you're looking at, and some marketeers are very, very good at that, and they employ all of these new tools to be very effective.
Yeah. What about influencers? Do you think influencers are still here to stay? I mean, they've had a great run, haven't they? And made shed loads of money out of being very connected people who are very authentic generally and just say it as it is, but have been able to put some real good expressions across. What's your view on influencers going forward? Are they going to continue to be very important in marketing for retail?
I think the influencers are definitely in there to stay. I think there's a whole range of different type of influencers, from the consumers themselves and following, and one size doesn't fit all, to sort of brand ambassadors at the other end of the scale, where you see real personalities, and that even touches again on the kind of co-branding collaboration arrangements. So you've got people like Kim Kardashian joining up with Fendi and people like that at one end of the scale, and at the other end of the scale you've got retailers and brands who have influencer programs for Joe Bloggs, the consumer. So I think it's a very wide piece, and I think it's what suits the consumer, that the business that is actually looking at it. So, but I think it's here to stay. It's part of social media framework, isn't it? And people engaging at social level.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the questions actually has just come in is asking whether we have particular challenges working with influencers, and I was just thinking of some of the influencers I've been working with. I think definitely making sure that they are making it clear in what they're doing that they are connected with brands is very important. We had rulings by the Advertising Standards Association earlier and guidance around that, and I still think there's a lot of people that aren't including it in posts or in what things that they're doing and how important that is. Ultimately, that will fall back to the retailer's risk if they're not making sure influencers are doing that. So I do think that's important. I think they also, influencers sometimes, I think it's difficult, as we see some influencers perhaps who are saying things and are being holding themselves out to have certain credentials, but then something in their personal life or their wider backgrounds comes along and actually doesn't really make it, find challenges then where retailers might have to distance themselves from them. So certainly that can be an area trying to do some real good due diligence to make sure that the people that you are using as influencers are genuinely not going to harm your brand in the long run. And that's a really, really difficult one. I think some influencers are finding just the heat of social media more tricky as it's been building and building, and are not necessarily wanting to get as involved and perhaps stepping back for a little while before coming back again. Those are some of the things that I'm seeing. Is anybody else, Dave and Simon, challenges with influencers? What are you seeing in the work that you're doing?
I think you're right. I mean, on the ASA side of things, there are obviously regulatory requirements to make sure that it's flagged as an advertisement. I think there's a lot to be said for training of influencers, for giving a proper framework for, it obviously depends on the influence and the degree of latitude they have to actually promote a brand, actually, giving over a platform for a day or running stories or whatever, as opposed to just posts. I think it's important to be clear about what they can and what they can't do, and for them to understand the parameters in which they operate and to have proper agreement in place. All of those things are familiar to us. Yeah, I think you need to look at what you want to achieve and then be clear about what the parameters are.
Dave, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think I'd echo all of that. And the only other thing I would say is that you do have to be cautious when you come to the termination piece, as you've said, in terms of because it is so dependent on one individual's brand and therefore their own actions and so on. You do have a real exposure to that individual doing or saying something that doesn't mesh well with your own brand values. But one of the difficulties is in terms of managing an exit from that. Clearly, when dealing with that one individual in what might well be a difficult part of their own life, you've got a risk of the pendulum swinging completely the other way if the person that you have previously been working with then sort of takes against how you're managing your exit from that relationship. So I think it is in a lot of ways a completely different dynamic in terms of we've had for a long period of time very controlled, manageable forms of advertising in terms of sort of pay-per-click and online advertising, which is very measurable, very deliverable, and it is such a completely different model to as Simon says, hand over your social media presence to an influencer for a period of time, and you need to be alive to how that differs and how that challenge, what the challenges that does present, because it is so completely different.
Yeah, one of the concerns that one of the people on our webinar today has is around this increasing regulation, the GDPR, digital advertising regulation. They're saying it feels like it's becoming a bit overwhelming, and legal departments are struggling to handle the questions that arise, as well as do the day-to-day work. And they're asking, have we seen any models that enable employees to confidently deal with these subject areas that the compliance needs? So interesting. I know we've been doing some various training and things. So Simon, can I bring you in on that to start off with, and then probably Dave if after that?
So on the question of, I'm just looking at the question, Philippa.
Yeah, so what models have you seen work to enable employees to confidently deal with the subject areas of compliance in GDPR, digital advertising, those sorts of things?
Yeah, on GDPR, I'm struggling to think of any particular model. In terms of advertising compliance, I think I mean, there's obviously a set of rules, and we engage in advertising clearance work here, and it's a question of training, really, ultimately, I think, and I suspect that that's probably true of GDPR obligations too. But again, the subject matter of that training will depend very much on the particular circumstances.
Yeah.
So I think it's, again, not a one size fits all, but Dave may have something to say on the GDPR side more specifically.
I think from a GDPR side, the key for me is that pre-GDPR, data protection was often put into its own silo, and that was given to legal, and that was it from a data protection perspective. But I think, as the question says, the dam's broken, and GDPR and the increased not only the standards and obligations that it imposes, but the increased potential financial exposure if you get it wrong, means that it can't be siloed anymore, and the people across the business need to be trained and be empowered to recognize data protection issues in a way that wasn't historically true, because the load does need to be shared across the business, at least in terms of understanding where the red flags are and what needs to be escalated and how. So I think that it has to be acknowledged within a lot of people's job specifications where it wasn't previously, that they need to be competent and speak the language of data protection to a degree, because with the vast majority of these things, the hurdles can be overcome, but it's a matter of timing. If you've got advanced warning and you need to look at how something is going to be structured so that data can be collected in an appropriate way and then used in the way that you want to use it, then that's relatively straightforward. If someone has raised that red flag early in the process and said, I think there are data concerns here,
yeah.
When it becomes really challenging and very difficult and a real drain on a business's resources is when it's after the fact, and when the complaints have started coming in, or when someone is saying, I shouldn't be getting these emails, this is a marketing email, why are you contacting me with this? So I think it's, as Simon says, it's that training and empowerment and procedural piece is the foundation block with all of that. And then the next step would be, as a development of that, sort of empowering individuals within each department to take their understanding to the next level and almost act as sort of data protection champions without necessarily turning to the legal department in the first instance. So they're sort of your tier one data protection responders, sit within each individual team, because in a lot of instances, someone who is at the coalface and really has an understanding of what is intended to be done with the data in question is the best placed person to resolve whatever the challenge might be, because that's been one of the key changes driven by GDPR, is that the question of what are you collecting and what are you doing with it and how are you informing the consumer of that, is front and center of everything. And so someone who is actually involved with the project and making those decisions is very well placed to do that, and put the relevant structures in place with the support of the legal team, rather than it being this is a data protection question. Everything has to be passed over to the legal team wholesale. So it has to be a much more integrated approach than it was perhaps 10 years ago.
Yeah, I think that your idea of the champions is a really good one. And also with the training, I know we often do checklists or parameters so people can know they can do these things or use these types of things, but otherwise they need to escalate it. And I think one of the things that came out of one of the training courses that I did recently was that somebody picked up, there were on some subscriptions, they were still sending out opportunities for people to subscribe, asking them to put their credit card details in and their PIN number on a piece of paper, which is a major no-no, but it was fine potentially, a number of years ago. But GDPR and the regulation now is you must not do that. You must not have those two things on a piece of paper together for obvious reasons. So, but that, again, that was the legal team wasn't able to pick that up because it was the marketing team that had been doing this for several years, and it's just quite tricky to always sweep all these things up. You can't have your eyes everywhere, can you? So it is about having that sort of alarm bells ringing. I think
that's it. And I think a large part of it is demystifying it, because for all the bad press that GDPR got at various points in a lot of it is relatively common sense regulation, in terms of, if you ask yourself the question, if this was me, would I? If you say no to that, then most of the time, if you follow the regulations through, the answer will be no. And equally, a lot of the urban myths that are out there in terms of we can't do X, Y, and Z because of GDPR, a number of those are themselves wrong. They were more prevalent when the regulation was very fresh and coming through, but obviously the memory of those stories stands. And so as part of that training and empowerment piece, it is sort of bringing home to people that it is a core element of their roles nowadays, and data is only going to get more relevant, and it's a very useful string to have to your bow, and it will mark you out within certain roles if you do have that understanding and that competence. Yeah,
thank you, Matt. Question for you on whether you're seeing any trends in moving from the traditional high street shopping centre to outlets for some of our foreign visitors, bearing in mind that we can't now claim they can't claim the tax back, as it were, unless they have things sent directly back to their homes. They can't, the traditional model of going in and buying things is not so easy for them. So have you noticed anything from your perspective, whether there's a bigger take up of outlets or likely to be? Is that still as exciting an area?
I think it's tricky to answer, honestly, because we're so recently coming out of travel restrictions. So it's more a guess what I think the future is, rather than an experience of the past. But I mean, the one thing that is for definite is the outlet village model is working. It's popular. It's becoming more and more popular with domestic shoppers. I infer from that it's popular with international shoppers as well. It's certainly popular with some of our retail clients, and especially in that sort of luxury or high street luxury part of the market. Retail, the outlet villages are thriving and they're doing well. So I think it would suggest that is going to continue to be the case, really. But for me, it's too soon to answer in terms of what have I seen, because I don't really have any data on it yet. It's just too soon, I think.
Okay, thank you. We wanted to move on to look at ESG and sustainability, which is important for all businesses, but in particular retail, it's very important too. One of the questions is, what areas of investment or actions should retailers be thinking about when it comes to these areas? I'll kick that one off, if I may, and then hand over to the rest of us. But we're seeing quite an uptick in the interest of retailers looking at different energy sources, particularly maybe warehousing, those sorts of areas with battery and heat exchange for retailers, looking at that ways of sort of carbon offset. sustainability has been key for a long time, and understanding and investing in sustainability internally, because I think a lot of the problems retailers have had over the last few years have been claiming sustainability within their products when they're actually finding out somewhere down the supply chain that isn't quite ring true. And sometimes it's not inadvertent. It might be just something on a label or something like that, which hasn't come from a sustainable source. And therefore, and really investing in those systems and your auditing and monitoring around that is really important. And one of the conversations I had with a retailer the other day was they were investing or trying to offset their carbon footprint by investing in South America in some new forestry projects. And then the question on that is, well, how do you know that we haven't got a load of other retailers buying the same trees? You know, things like that, where we have, I think blockchain and other things coming through will help with those sorts of things. But for me right now, those two would be the key things. One is looking at energy and sustainability on that side of things, and that will no doubt feed into property when you're looking at new leases and things like that. And sustainability, very much looking at ensuring, I think to get to the first base is really still important, to make sure that what you're claiming, you can claim, and you don't go into it too quickly and then realise you're going to get tripped up. Dave, I don't know, on your side of things, are there any particular areas where you're seeing people are making large investments at the moment or concentrating their time?
I think the sustainability is definitely moving up the chain of importance in terms of from a contractual perspective what people are looking at, and we're now starting to see contracts that actually have ESG focused clauses that have real bite to them, because we've had for a number of years people sort of paying lip service, if you will, to certain elements of ESG by saying, for example, that suppliers will comply with the customers' corporate social responsibility policies and so on. But now we are actually seeing KPIs and proper reporting being introduced into contracts. Now, a good part of the credit for that, I think, goes to the Chancery Lane project, which for those who haven't seen, is a project essentially trying to standardize a lot of these clauses that give real weight to contractual obligations here. So there's been dozens of organizations have fed into the drafting, which then allows people to draw upon that wealth of knowledge to be able to use those to impose obligations on their suppliers. But as you say, Philippa, at the heart of a lot of this is the issue of monitoring and auditing and compliance, and the ability of small to medium-sized businesses to do that is and always has been very, 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 very challenging, in the same way that it is for a lot of the other regulatory-led obligations in terms of things like the Modern Slavery Act and the Bribery Act and so on. Sort of getting that supply chain transparency, it can be incredibly difficult. And I think, as you say, that there's opportunities from a blockchain perspective, but it's always going to be very, very, very challenging.
Brilliant.
I'd echo on your point about claims, because obviously false and misleading advertising claims would be an issue around environmental credentials. I think from a consumer perspective, it's been quite important. We've seen markets arising for second-hand clothing and rented with sort of environmental credentials sitting behind that. I think on the supply chain thing, tracking and tracing goods is key, and there's a sort of anti-counterfeiting element to that as well, because if you can track goods properly, that can help you on that score, and also in relation to grey goods. And I think on the anti-counterfeiting as well, because there's clearly some consumers who are interested in, there's some messaging there around why counterfeits that might not meet those criteria, you know, are a bad thing. Just a few more thoughts.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm conscious of time. I think we've just got probably time for one more question before we wrap up, and it's a very interesting and challenging question, I think, around Apple and Facebook. And the question is, love to hear the panel's view on ISO 14 and ISO 15, the impact of Apple and Facebook battling over users' data, and the impact of an e-commerce world without cookies, and thus little relevance to users' lives and preferences. Yes, it's all been going on in that world and continues to go on, as sort of alluded to earlier. So Dave, have you got particular thoughts on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, this is what lies at the heart of what I touched on earlier in terms of Facebook saying that these changes that Apple had made, which essentially boil down to pop-ups saying, do you want to share this data with this app? And Facebook saying that that's going to cost them about 10 billion over 2022. Now, the core issue here is that obviously for years and years, Facebook and a lot of other companies have made huge amounts of money over collecting users' data and selling and using it in various ways. And GDPR and Apple's changes here are the first sort of signs of the pendulum swinging back the other way. And users taking more control over that data and saying, well, actually, no, I don't want that to happen. So I think a key part of that is the fact that users are becoming so much more savvy in terms of the value of their data and understanding where it goes and so on. And so I don't think we're necessarily going to lead to a world where there are no cookies and there are no profiles in terms of users' likes and preferences and so on. I think it forces people to have a more open conversation with their consumers to say, this is why we want to collect your data and this is why it's going to be beneficial to you. Because you can't rely on it happening in the background anymore. You have to sort of make the case more to say, we would like to do this and this is the reason why. And I think that you're going to end up with two worlds of people, those who successfully make that case, who are trusted with and have a really detailed profile about their users and that their users see the value in that because they get offers, etc., that they find really useful. And those who aren't trusted with the data, where people just land on their page, say, no, please don't place any cookies, and they're left with a lot of very anonymous customers. So I think as users become more and more aware of that and the difference that makes, it's going to become more of a challenge to overcome that hurdle and be trusted with the information that leads into the profiles. And I think what I touched on earlier in terms of the omni-channel solutions that people are going to have in place and the frictionless stores and so on, it's all about having that consumer trust with your data.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, I would like to thank all of our audience for coming along today. I know you were all very busy. I hope you found it interesting, some of the things that we've got to say. I know a lot of them do resonate with you from the comments in the question and answer, so thank you very much. On behalf of the Freeths team, as head of the retail group, I thank you for coming along, and I would just like to signpost for you that we will be running a number of the webinars, picking up on quite a lot of these trends and topics over the course of the next 12 months. If you have particular things that you would like us to be discussing or answering, then please do let us know, either by leaving it on the Q&A session now, or we'll no doubt be coming back to you and asking for feedback from this to see whether you found it valuable. We hope you have. We enjoy working in retail. You can probably tell we're all inspired by the creativity of all of the people on this call and the wider retail networks. I think for Freeths it's an exciting area because it's really pushing the boundaries of, particularly on the tech side and on the intellectual property side, of what is out there, and I think retail is at the forefront of many of these aspects. So thank you everybody for coming today. Thank you Dave, Matt and Simon for joining me, and look forward to seeing you all next time. Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you all.